"Don't sign that." That's all she said. In a room full of sharks, a waitress just stopped a $100 million deal. Every man at that table laughed. One even called her sweetheart. But when Jonathan Hale looked back at the contract, he saw something they didn't. A buried clause. A trap. A secret that could destroy everything. Now he's wondering, who is this waitress, and how the hell did she know? When the waitress said, "Don't sign," the room laughed. When he listened, the empire started to crumble. He was about to sign the deal of the year, a signature that would seal a fortune and quietly destroy hundreds of lives, when a trembling waitress leaned in and whispered, "Please, don't sign that." Everything stopped. The laughter, the glass clinking, the storm outside, even the air seemed to freeze around her voice. It was one of those Chicago nights that felt cinematic, the city lights smeared across wet glass, thunder crawling across the skyline like it had somewhere to be. Inside the Aurelia, money was being celebrated. Men in tailored suits were laughing like the world was theirs, and maybe, in a way, it was. At the far end of the room, Jonathan Hale sat quiet. He didn't need to laugh, his existence did the talking. A man who had gone from nothing to everything, then somehow ended up feeling nothing again. He should have felt proud. The merger would make headlines, boost his net worth, make investors drool. But as his lawyers tossed around numbers with the ease of bartenders calling drink orders, Jonathan's mind was somewhere else, in the hollow sound of the pen tapping against the paper, the sound that used to mean victory but now just echoed boredom. He looked around the table, men he'd known for years, faces carved by ambition, smiles sharpened by deals. They were winning, sure. But none of them looked alive. And then she appeared. Grace. A waitress barely in her 20s, moving through the chaos like someone tiptoeing through a minefield. She wasn't polished, just sincere. Her uniform was too big, her hands too small for the tray she carried, but her eyes, they were observant. The kind that saw more than they were supposed to. When she reached Jonathan's table, she hesitated. A tremor ran through her hand as she refilled his glass. Maybe it was the room, the arrogance, the smell of power. Or maybe it was what she knew. Jonathan noticed. He noticed everything that night, for once. Then she leaned in, just enough for her voice to barely escape her throat. "Sir," she whispered, "please, don't sign that." You could hear the rain again. You could feel every head at the table tilt in disbelief. One of the lawyers laughed under his breath. "Cute," he muttered. "She thinks this is a movie." Grace's eyes went wide. She realized what she'd done. She stepped back, heart pounding, tray trembling. Jonathan just stared at her. No anger. Just curiosity. Because in all the noise of his empire, the meetings, the applause, the meaningless congratulations, it had been a long time since someone had spoken to him like he was human. He didn't say a word. Just stood up slowly, left his pen on the table, and walked out into the rain. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse with the contract spread open, the city burning quietly outside his window. Page after page, he read. Buried deep in legal jargon, he found it, the paragraph Grace must have seen. The merger wasn't just a business deal. It was a quiet execution. Entire factories would shut down. Towns would die. People like Grace's father, men who'd given decades to the company, would lose everything. Again. That night, the millionaire felt something he hadn't felt in years, shame. By sunrise, he made the call. No deal. No signatures. No headlines. The fallout was immediate. Angry calls. Threats. Investors. Panicking. But Jonathan didn't flinch. He'd already lost more important things once, his decency, his purpose, and this time, he wasn't willing to trade them again. Before we dive deeper, this isn't just a story about a waitress and a millionaire. It's about the split second where money meets morality and someone actually chooses right. If that hits you, hit subscribe. Let's make humanity go viral again. The next evening, the Aurelia buzzed as if nothing had happened. The same soft jazz, the same perfect smiles, the same unspoken hierarchy, the rich in their comfort, the staff in their shadows. Grace almost didn't come in. She'd barely slept. All night, she replayed that whisper in her head, what if he'd fired her on the spot? What if she'd just destroyed her life for nothing? By morning, she convinced herself it was over. He'd probably signed anyway, forgotten her name, maybe even laughed about it later. Men like that always did. So when she saw Jonathan Hale walk back into the restaurant the next evening, alone this time, her stomach dropped. He wasn't in a suit. No entourage. Just a man who looked like he hadn't slept either. The Maître d' lit up like Christmas, eager to seat him, but Jonathan waved him off. "I'll find my own table," he said. Grace tried to disappear into the kitchen, but his voice stopped her. "Excuse me. Grace, right?" Every pair of eyes in the room turned. Hers too. "Yes, sir," she managed. "Can we talk?" They sat in a corner booth. For once, Jonathan looked uncertain, not the confident, untouchable man from the night before, but someone stripped of armor. "I read the contract," he said quietly. "You were right." Grace froze, unsure whether to be relieved or terrified. "I shouldn't have said anything," she blurted. "It wasn't my place." He shook his head. "It was exactly your place. You saw something no one else bothered to see." For a moment, they just sat there, the silence filled with the low hum of dishes clinking and rain whispering against the windows. "How did you even know?" he asked finally. Grace hesitated. "My dad used to work for one of your subsidiaries. 20 years. He lost everything when they shut down his plant. I recognized the name in the merger papers. I knew what it meant." Jonathan nodded slowly, guilt creeping across his face like shadow. "I didn't know. I didn't, look. Most people don't," she said, not cruelly, just honest. "It's easier that way." He exhaled, the kind of breath that sounds like confession. "You risked your job to warn me. Why?" Grace looked him in the eye. "Because someone had to." There it was, the moment. Small, but seismic. The millionaire and the waitress, sitting across from each other, not as symbols of wealth or struggle, but as two people tired of pretending the world made sense. Jonathan leaned back, studying her. "Have you ever thought about leaving this place? Doing something bigger?" She laughed softly. "Bigger than serving steak to men who don't look up from their phones?" He smiled. "Exactly that." She shrugged. "Sure. But people like me don't just leave. We survive." That line hit him harder than he expected. Because once upon a time, before the boardrooms and billion-dollar handshakes, Jonathan had been the same. A kid who survived. He left her a card, plain, no company logo, just his name and number. "If you ever need help, call me," he said. Grace stared at it after he walked out, her fingers tracing the edge like it was something dangerous. "Yeah, right," she whispered to herself. "And I'm supposed to believe the millionaire who listens to waitresses." Still, she didn't throw it away. That night, Jonathan sat in his car outside the Aurelia, watching the rain blur the neon sign. He could have driven off, left it all behind, pretended that Whisper hadn't cracked something open in him. But he didn't. Instead, he rolled down the window, let the cold air slap him awake, and said quietly to no one, "Maybe she just saved me." What would you do if you discovered someone powerful was about to make a terrible mistake? Would you risk your job to stop them? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. 2 weeks passed. No calls. No sign of him. Grace figured it was done, just another strange, beautiful moment swallowed by reality. She went back to double shifts, bad coffee, and the quiet ache of dreams that never had time to grow. Until one morning, her manager handed her an envelope. No return address. Just her name in clean, deliberate handwriting. Inside was a short note. "I'm starting something new. Come see for yourself. J." And a train ticket. Grace almost laughed. "Yeah, because hopping on random trains sent by rich men never ends badly," she muttered. But something in her chest said go. She arrived at an industrial district outside the city, empty warehouses, cracked pavement, and one building that still had life in it. Inside, she found Jonathan, rolled up sleeves, surrounded by blueprints and young volunteers. He looked different. Grounded. "This used to be a factory my company shut down," he said, offering her a hard hat like it was a peace offering. "I'm reopening it. Fair wages. Local ownership. You were right, I've got a lot to fix." Grace blinked, speechless. You're serious? He smiled faintly. I'm tired of being the villain in other people's stories. Over the next weeks, Grace became part of something she didn't know she needed. She wasn't a waitress here, she was a voice. An advisor. Someone who knew what survival looked like up close. Jonathan listened. Really listened. Sometimes they argued about fairness, about what doing good actually meant. But in those conversations, you could feel something building, not romance, not yet. Respect. The rare kind that doesn't need to be spoken. Then came the backlash. A leak hit the business press. Millionaire cancels deal, turns to charity project. Investors lost their minds. Board members called him unstable. Stock prices dipped. One executive told him flat out, "You're tanking your reputation over a waitress." Jonathan fired him on the spot. But the damage spread. Journalists camped outside his office. Old partners turned their backs. And in the middle of the chaos, Grace got dragged into the headlines. The waitress behind the fall of Jonathan Hale. Her face was everywhere. Customers whispered when she served them. Some called her brave. Others called her stupid. One night, she sat in the staff locker room, scrolling through hate comments, hands shaking. Jonathan called. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This shouldn't have touched you." "It's fine," she lied. "You should have just signed that paper and saved yourself the headache." He paused. "You really think I could have done that, after what you said?" Silence. Then she exhaled, half laughing, half crying. "No. I guess not." They met again at the warehouse. The place was starting to look alive now, fresh paint, machines humming faintly, workers moving with cautious hope. Grace walked beside him through the noise. "Why are you doing all this, Jonathan?" she asked. He looked around, the people, the light, the sound of second chances taking shape. "Because you reminded me what it's like to give a damn." She smiled, a small one. "Careful. You're starting to sound human." He laughed. "Let's not get carried away." That night, Jonathan stayed late, watching the workers leave. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a number in a suit. He felt useful. And Grace, walking home under the city lights, realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was part of something bigger. Have you ever tried to do the right thing and paid the price for it? Tell me below. I want to hear the stories that never make the headlines. It started small, a few machines turning back on, a few people getting their jobs back. Hope was sneaking in through the cracks, uninvited but stubborn. Grace spent her days buried in paperwork, phone calls, and community meetings. She wasn't trained for any of this, but people trusted her. Maybe because she spoke like someone who'd lost before and still showed up. Jonathan showed up too, early, messy, and human. Gone were the sharp suits and the entourage. He wore rolled sleeves and steel-toe boots now. The man who once signed deals over champagne now carried blueprints and coffee. And somewhere between the noise of the factory floor and the quiet of late-night planning sessions, something unspoken grew between them. Not romance, not the storybook kind. Something deeper. The comfort of two people who saw through each other's masks and didn't look away. But life doesn't let anyone get too comfortable. The board struck back. They called an emergency meeting, mahogany table, bitter coffee, men in $1,000 ties ready to eat him alive. "Jonathan, you've lost 70 million in projected revenue," one said. "You're being manipulated," another sneered. "She's a waitress, for God's sake." Jonathan leaned back, calm in that dangerous way that means a man's already decided. "She's the only person in this room who's ever told me the truth." That shut them up for a second. Then the storm came. Votes. Motions. Lawyers. When he walked out of that room, he was no longer CEO. Grace heard the news on her lunch break. She froze, fries halfway to her mouth. He didn't answer her calls. Days passed. Then a week. The warehouse fell quiet again, workers scared, unsure if it would all crumble before it began. Grace almost quit. But then she remembered the first night she'd met him, the weight in his voice when he said, "Maybe she just saved me." She wasn't about to let that go to waste. She called the workers, the families, the local press, anyone who'd listen. She told them the truth. That a man who once measured life in profit had finally chosen people. And that maybe, just maybe, that was worth saving. The story caught fire. Headlines flipped. Fired CEO's factory revival inspires city. Public support grew. And then, out of nowhere, Jonathan walked back into the warehouse. The whole room went silent. He looked tired but alive, eyes bright with that dangerous kind of peace that comes when you've got nothing left to lose. Who said this place was shutting down? He asked, half smiling. Grace ran up, words tangled in her throat. You lost everything. He shrugged. Not everything. Just the parts that didn't matter. Then he pulled out a folder, blueprints for expansion. I used my own money. We're keeping this going. The Horizon Trust is real. She stared at him. You're insane. Probably, he said. But it feels good. Months passed. The project grew. The warehouse became a lifeline not just for jobs, but for dignity. Grace found herself giving speeches, leading teams, mentoring others. The girl who once whispered out of fear now spoke from a stage. Jonathan stayed in the background, proud, quiet. Watching her become everything the world once told her she couldn't be. At the foundation's first anniversary, the lights dimmed, and Grace stepped to the podium. Sometimes, she said, voice trembling, change doesn't start with power or money. It starts with someone who's tired of pretending they can't make a difference. She looked toward Jonathan in the crowd. He didn't smile, he just nodded. That was enough. The audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered. For once, Grace didn't shrink from it. She let herself feel it. The weight. The wonder. The miracle of being seen. This story shows how one whisper can ripple into something unstoppable. What's the one small act you could do this week, the thing that might start your own ripple? Drop it in the comments. Maybe someone out there needs to see it. A year later, the Horizon Trust wasn't just an idea anymore, it was a movement. Factories reopened. Families rebuilt. Kids who once watched their parents lose everything were now heading to college on scholarships Grace helped design. Jonathan didn't chase headlines. He avoided interviews. He let Grace stand in the spotlight while he stayed behind the scenes, signing checks quietly, showing up when no one noticed. He'd traded luxury for peace, and somehow, that felt like winning for the first time in his life. Grace's life had shifted, too. She wasn't the waitress who stopped a billionaire anymore. She was Director Grace, mentor and advocate. The kind of woman her father would have bragged about to anyone who'd listen. But she never forgot where it started. That night in the Aurelia. The whisper. The shaking hands. The courage she didn't even know she had. Sometimes, when she walked home after late meetings, she'd stop by that restaurant. It was still there, same soft jazz, same warm lights behind the glass. Only now, she could afford to eat there if she wanted. But she never did. She just looked through the window, smiled, and kept walking. Jonathan, meanwhile, had learned to live slower. He spent mornings at community centers, afternoons visiting small business owners he'd helped fund. Once, a little girl handed him a thank you card drawn in crayon, a crooked heart and the words, "You fixed my dad's job." He kept it folded in his wallet like a sacred thing. The man who once signed away lives with a pen now measured his days in letters like that. One evening, at the foundation's second anniversary, Grace walked onto the stage to speak. Jonathan watched from the crowd, hands clasped, eyes steady. This all started with 3 words, she began. "Don't sign that." The audience chuckled softly, but her tone shifted. What I didn't know back then was that those words weren't just for him. They were for me too. A reminder that silence helps no one, that courage doesn't always shout sometimes, it whispers. She paused, voice thickening. None of us can change the whole world. But we can change someone's world. And that's how it starts. Applause rose again, this time deeper, the kind that comes from people who feel something shift in their chest. Jonathan wiped at his eyes, pretending it was dust. When the event ended, Grace found him near the back. They didn't say much, they didn't need to. "Proud of you," he said simply. "Wouldn't be here without you," she replied. He smiled. "Wouldn't be me without you." Later that night, Grace stood outside the foundation building, city lights glimmering like 1,000 small chances. She thought about the girl she'd been scared, unseen, holding a tray and a truth too heavy to carry. And about the man she'd stopped, lost, hollow, about to cross a line that would have cost him his soul. One whisper. 2 lives rewritten. The rain started again, soft and familiar. She looked up, let it fall across her face, and whispered back to the night. Worth it. The Horizon Trust continues to grow, more small businesses funded, more lives rebuilt. Grace leads international outreach. Jonathan serves as advisor, still avoiding cameras. Their story has become legend in business schools, though neither of them cares much for that. What matters is that somewhere out there, another Grace is whispering. And maybe, another Jonathan is listening. Stories like this remind us that decency still exists, that sometimes, one quiet act of courage can flip the whole script of someone's life. If this story hits you somewhere deep, don't just scroll on. Tap that like button, subscribe, and share it, not for the algorithm, but because the world needs reminders that kindness still wins. And tell me in the comments, if it were you that night, would you have whispered the truth? Let's keep making humanity go viral again.